I've had at least one case in which the arbitrator said it was going to be his last case before he retired, and perhaps he should have retired a little bit sooner. But the other arbitrators have largely helped those types along. And I've actually been pleasantly surprised by some of those arbitrators who I thought were not really able to make a decision, then have asked their own independent questions that showed that they actually were following the case completely and actually asked very relevant questions that were very pointed in the right directions. So I've not really seen an arbitrator who's way out in left field who just has no business being there. The most controversial from an industry standpoint are claimants' attorneys who make their living representing customers also can serve as arbitrators and are considered public arbitrators.
How often does an arbitrator fall asleep? Have you ever seen that happen?
Only a couple of times, and I think it has been well deserved. I'm not an attorney, but I'm intelligent enough to know that if you're making your case to three people and you see them looking around and not paying attention and rolling their eyes and eating popcorn, no matter how good you think your line of questioning is or your evidence that you're presenting, if they're not buying it, you ought to move on. And some attorneys don't have enough common sense or are not paying enough attention to see, okay, this arbitrator is looking up at the sky and thinking to himself, and you can almost see him thinking, when is this guy going to move on to something? I'm not buying this at all. And then they keep going, and eventually the arbitrator falls asleep. I mean, it's human nature to an extent, and I think if you're presenting your case and you're representing your client well, you ought to be paying attention to that kind of thing. And arbitrators are humans too. You can see their reactions. You can see them. You can see when they're nodding their head and saying, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me." And you go, "Okay, I'm scoring some points with this guy." And you can see when he's shaking his head and rolling his eyes, and you ought to be saying to yourself, "Okay, this isn't working. I got to move on."